I just wanted to show everyone how you're supposed to be using the book, and I'm going to show you an example of the random number and how to populate an array using that, and so I just looked at the textbook, and I wanted to show you the beginning of the textbook in chapter 10. It talks about arrays, and so I just went through and I plugged the code in. So as I'm reading, I'm testing it out. I'm trying to absorb what they're trying to say, and it's really hard just to read and to understand what's happening. So what I like to do is read and then type and sort of see what happens. Also, the textbook does have sample problems. It'll say like, oh, try this, or because it wants you to test as you go and practice as you go, because that's how you're supposed to learn it. So I think some people are just kind of skimming the book and then flipping to the end and trying to do the problems, and you can't do that with programming. It's not going to work. You have to read, you have to take your time with it. So in this chapter, they talked about declaring an array. So you can see we have the straight brace here. So we have, which indicates that it's going to be an array. And this array is going to be called count, and it's going to have four cells in the array. So it's going to have 4 places where we can hold information. So there's going to be the 4 indices. It's going to start at 0, the 0th place, and it's going to go to place 3. So it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3. That's 4 spots. I also created a random number here, and this is going to be a new variable, and I like to declare my variables outside of the loop. When you first declare a variable, you put the int in front of it, and I just think it's cleaner to not put that inside of a loop. So now I have some comments here that I added in. So it says this loop will call the random int method to get random numbers from 0 up to 10. The loop's going to run 10 times, and the numbers will print all in a row with a space between each number. I actually ended up putting 2 spaces in there because I thought it would look a little bit better. You can see down here I have a couple spaces between. This is my output already. I ran the code. And so this loop is I just created this basically just to get 10 random numbers. So that what we really want to look at is the random int. So I did this print statement because I wanted to test to make sure my random numbers worked. To make sure, because when you're doing random numbers, you want it to include the low number sometimes. So you can see I'm getting some zeros here, but you don't want it to include the upper range. So you can see there's no 10s here. They didn't come through. So we got all the way up to, let's see, 8 is my highest number, but I didn't get a 10. And then I just put a print line in between there because I did a print statement instead of having all of the numbers list in a row, because print line, as you know, returns the cursor to the next line, and I didn't want that. So I put spaces in between instead. I just printed them all in a row, and then I just did one print line statement to return. Okay, so now this loop right here is populating the array that I created in the beginning of the program with a random integer from 0 up to 50. And so for this one, so I had to use a different counter. So this one I'm just using k. So first it's a for loop, and so I have k is equal to 0. And then I'm going to do k less than count's length. So we know count's length is 4 because we created it just above. So we can go up here and we can say, yep, so it's only going to be 4 long. But we know from arrays that they start at 0. So what this counter will do is it'll go from 0 all the way up to, it has to be less than the length, so it has to be less than 4. So you know the number, the integer less than 4 is going to be 3, and that's exactly what we want. We want each index to be counted. So we want 0, we want 1, we want 2, we want 3, but we don't want 4 because then we would get an out of range error. We don't want that. And then this is going to increase by 1. And down here, we have that nice straight brace in here. And so the count array at index k, so at first it's going to be 0, is going to be equal to a call to the random int method. So we're going to review that method in a moment, but it's going to call the random integer method, and it's going to give us a number from 0 to 50. So it's going to include 0, but it's not going to include 50, so it's going to go up through number 49. And that's going to fill, so this is how I'm going to fill my array. So it's going to go through and say, okay, so for index 0, make a call, whatever that is, you're putting that in spot 0. And then when I do that, then it's going to go here and it's going to increment my counter by 1, so then it's going to be k is going to be equal to 1. It's going to test it to say is 1 less than 4, which is the length. Yes. So then it's going to say, okay, count of 1 is going to be equal to another call to the random method. And again, the same conditions, 0 being the low, 50 being the high. And that number is going to populate the index 1. And then it's going to go back up here and it's going to increment by 1. So it's going to be position 2. And it's going to say 2 is less than 4, and it's going to say position 2. It's going to make another call. So it's going to continue to do this loop until I get to, it's going to increment to number 4, and then it's going to fail the test, and it's not going to go on. And then here, I just print out the value in each array indices and the corresponding element, because I want to say, okay, at this index spot, and index spot I, the value is going to be, well, what element, what information, what data am I holding in that index, and it's going to tell me what information is in there, and then it's going to increment. So I'm going to get everything. And so you can see down here, this is my first run of my code, and I'm going to run it again so you can see. So now this time I don't have any zeros in my code, and so this one, these random numbers are going up to 10, and then these random numbers are going up to 50. So you can see I see some 44, 48, 21, 4. And every time I run it, because they're getting random numbers, it's going to change. So now index 0 is 22, index 1 is 32, index 2 is 21, and index 3 is 47. So I get all double digits there. And these ones are going to range from 0 up through 9, because it has to be less than 10. Getting some larger numbers, and I get 0. I haven't gotten 9 yet. And sometimes the numbers will be the same, and that's okay because it's random. You don't know. Now look, this time I have 2 single digits. So let's look at how we create the random number. So that's down here. So on page 123 of the book, it says create a method called randomInt that takes 2 integers, low and high, and returns a random integer so that x is inclusive of the low and less than the high. So this is sort of the math. So x is going to be between the low number, and it could be equal to it, but it has to be less than the high number. So here is what the method looks like. This is how I solved it, and I've tested it so I know that my code works right. So before I do anything else, I always test to make sure it's accurate before I build another method. So this one, first I calculate the range. So I say, okay, the range is going to be the high number minus the low number. So for depending which call went, so this top line, my range is 10, and for this bottom call, my range was 50. So it was a bigger range because my high number was 50, and I subtract my low number, which was 0, so my range is 50. I create a double for x, and I populate the x variable with math.random. So math.random, what that does is it gives a random number from 0 to 1. So it doesn't include 1, so it's going to be 0, 0.1, 0.2, it could be 0.23. It's going to give a random number all the way up to 0.9999999 infinity. So it's going to go on and on and on. So it's never going to reach 1. So whatever that number is, so it's just going to hold it in that x spot. And so then to get the random number, I start with the low number, and I add to it the high number, and I'm going to multiply it by that random number. So that's going to ensure that I stay within my range. And then you see right here, I did a casting. So I casted it into an integer because I don't want it to be a double. X has to be a double because this is a floating point number, so I have to have that as a double. But really, I don't want to deal with, I could, but for this one I don't. I want to have them as an integer. So that's what that does. And then I'm just returning the value. And so that's why this says int instead of void, because I'm going to return the value. If, when I'm building my method, let's say I didn't have the return value in there, automatically as I'm typing, I would get this. And if I mouse over it, it says I'm missing my return statement. And so it knows, because I didn't put void here, that I should have some type of a return in my code. And that's why it was giving me the error message. And as soon as I fix that, it goes away. And so this was how I created the random number. And I've tested it, and I think that it's working because I'm getting those larger numbers. I really wish I'd get 9, but I haven't gotten 9. Oh, see, look, I wished for 9, and then I got 9. That's very exciting. So that is how you take the book, you practice practice with what it says. And so now when I go on and I do different problems and they say, okay, I need to get a random number, I can go back. This is encapsulated. I can take this method and copy it into future codes. So it really behooves you to go through the book slowly and do the best that you can, copying what they say in the book and trying to make it work and testing it out to make sure it's accurate. If you need anything, post to the public discussions and somebody will get back to you.